All right, you guys, welcome back to another episode of The Common Theory. And of course, as always, I'm your host, Gatorbait, along with my man, Puzzlebox. How you been doing, bro? How's everything treating you?
Not too shabby, not too shabby. Just got done taking all my finals, so semester's
Nice.
over. Got like 4 weeks of break, so got plenty of time
Oh,
to pump out some content.
all right. We're gonna do some more games.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
How are you doing?
good. Oh man, it's been pretty hectic, but yeah, I'm envious of your relaxation time right now. Not gonna lie, but yeah, we'll just have to keep on going. Work has been pretty wild, so it is what it is.
Yeah,
But
adult.
oh yeah, adult life is no joke. But with that said, we have a very interesting topic for you guys. Um, so we are going to hit you guys with something called Every Point Matters. And the reason we're bringing this topic up is because we've had a few. Well, let me rephrase this. We have observed this quite a bit where we're in games, we're playing with other people, and people are just not attacking. And if they had been, they could have won that game. So we're going to break that down for you guys and really make sure and hammer it home that every point matters. Attacking matters. And I know it's hard for some people because, I mean, as we know good old Puzzle here. He's not one to attack, so.
It's true, that is true.
But yeah, let me bring up this first topic for you guys. So let's start with Malcolm and Kedis. So I wanted to bring them up because they are such a good deck to use as an example here because the deck is actually hitting the table simultaneously with the Kedis triggers, right? So you're always going to incrementally bring everyone's life total down. And that's fantastic for the deck. So whether a lot of people believe it or not, Kedis helps you actually have a secondary win con. And yes, I know twoing the table does not sound very good. But when you get stopped from comboing over and over again, you need another way to win the game. And that's how the deck does it. And if you miss a trigger, you miss a point of damage, even from Kedis himself, you end up losing that game. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's a thing that comes up a lot in Malcolm specifically, because in our format so often Malcolm is trying to attack to get those triggers in the first place. A lot of times you get into these situations where you could potentially take a player out with your Malcolm, especially in Malcolm Kedis, where you're hitting the entire table. You soften the table up, and that can be both a good thing and a bad thing, right? Um,
Oh yeah.
this is kind of a general topic that I'm going to talk about as the big combo player because I love combo. Is that sometimes combo decks specifically really don't want to be taking players out. So in decks like Malcolm Kedis, sometimes the fact that you're damaging the entire table can be a bad thing for you. But it
Right.
is also a potential secondary win condition, like you're saying, where, if you keep getting interacted with and the game's taking forever and everybody's hitting each other, you're pumping out six, maybe nine if you're getting in with Kedis as well, damage to the table with just your commanders every turn. That's definitely not nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the includes with the downshifts, gutter snipe specifically, that really gave this deck that secondary line, right? We already had the pingers in the deck, but the gutter snipe being able to really push damage ahead has not gone unnoticed. So I definitely had to bring up cards like gutter snipe because it's kind of that example of we're just gonna let it sit and play, guys, and go from there and see what happens.
And that's especially true of the more controlling Malcolm Red deck, Malcolm Breaches, where you can win with damage much more often than you would in Malcolm Kedis, just because you're trying to control the game and slow the game down and get value off of pingers, and you're playing more of them typically. So you're going to be dealing a lot of incidental damage. And
Yep.
sometimes you just win the game by pinging people to death and storming off. And yeah, you got to keep that secondary win condition in mind. And swinging with your pingers too is another big one. Like you're getting the
Yep.
passive damage, but if you can get in for two with that Firebrand Archer, that's that's two pings for absolutely free, zero resource investment. You're not going to
Yeah.
block with it
Exactly.
anyways. So why
Yep.
not swing?
Yep. Exactly. Super, super fair. And, we're using this deck as an example, guys, because this deck specifically, you're going to see it around. It definitely sees play in the meta. But it is a combo example of a deck that is not ever truly trying to win via the, just damaging the table. But you will get put into those situations with deck like this where that will happen to you. So you can't miss a point of damage. And, we're going to be a little annoying with that, you guys. We're going to just kind of keep hammering that home. But let's move on to our next example, which you actually brought this one up, and this is a perfect example. Sivirus Cloakwood Hermit. So the reason I like this deck as an example was your exact statement was you can't forget to attack with your elves. I think that's such a fair statement because a lot of people forget, even if they block and you have Cloakwood and Sivirus and your engines going, you're actually helping Sivirus get the squirrels. So people are even incentivized to not even block your one damage. And with a mid range deck such as this, you really need every point of damage to be able to close the game.
Yeah, swinging into blockers gets a lot more questionable when you're swinging with something like a Llanowar Elf. But if you were completely unable to get your Sivirus trigger that turn, and you can swing in, and you really need those tokens, absolutely, it's definitely worth it. Especially if you have like Mirkwood or Nadir in play. They either take one
Uh,
damage or they take the tokens damage. So like it's guaranteed damage either way. And those situations where you have that mana dork and you're like, oh well, I didn't have. If I go turn one Llanowar Elf, and then turn two I just play a 2-drop, swing with the 1/1 at somebody who doesn't have a creature, because your win condition in this deck is damage. You don't
oh yeah.
typically have a combo win condition unless you get really lucky with stickers, yada yada. So that damage matters so much more in this deck than it does for Malcolm Kedis or Malcolm Breaches more often than not, because if damage is your win condition, this is even more important for you.
I mean, it's like we've hammered home 1,000 times, right? If you're going to be a mid-range strategy, you need the ability to close the game. So if you miss 1 point of damage, that will cost you a game. Hands down, no if, no ands, no buts. And that's why it's so important because that one damage can change everything, right? That could make, as crazy as I'm going to sound with my statement, that'll make mid-range decks even go up winning games because you're actually actively trading blockers. You're pushing through to get every incremental point you can, which I find to be very important.
Here's a question for you with the mana dork topic here. Do you think it's better to push through that guaranteed one damage or to bluff that you have interaction by holding up the mana dorks?
So that's actually a great question. And I will tell you what I will do personally. I would push the damage. And the reason I'm going to push the damage is because if they're going to have it, they're going to have it. So your bluff will lose you the game. Now, granted, you kind of have to depend on players sometimes, right? Because, 4 players. So sometimes we have to get the table's assistance. So you're not always going to be open, and they're not always going to be open. So in my eyes, I'm attacking. I'm sending the team forward. And realistically, depending on the situation, of course, there could be a way that I'm forcing them to block, or they just block for some reason and make a mistake. So I like the factor of making an opponent try to figure out why you're doing that. Because let's be honest, you have to take turns off sometimes. That's just how the game functions. That's how these mid range decks are sometimes. You have to take the turn off. So I would push the damage. That's what about you? Are you gonna push the damage? Or are you gonna sit back and relax?
Man, it's so context dependent, obviously. Like, so is
Oh yeah.
everything in this game, right? But like, if it's turn two and I played a 2-drop like I was talking about before, and then I just have my little 1/1, I'm definitely pushing that damage
Yeah.
because I don't really gain anything by bluffing that 1 green mana. Like,
Yep.
I could be holding up a Snakeskin Veil, sure, but I don't have any real threat in play, so it's not worth much if I pretend that I have a Snakeskin Veil, and could even potentially be detrimental if, for instance, everyone thinks I have an Avoid Fate, and then the blue player after me taps out, and then the next player combos off, and they go, "Oh, well, I thought you had an Avoid Fate up," and then we lose because I didn't swing with my Mana Dork. Obviously, that's a very convoluted situation, and I'm putting in a lot of bits and
A lot
pieces
of thought.
there, but
Yeah. A
um,
lot of thought there.
that can happen. Whereas, if it's turn 10 and I have a Mirkwood Bats in play, I would probably just not swing. I would rather bluff that I have the interaction potentially, depending on life totals and such, obviously, once again, but, you know, um,
Well,
you already have
let me
the
hit you with this one.
opportunity to win with damage there.
Very true. Let me hit you with this one because this is one reason I've gotten a little pushback when I've been like, bro, attack. What are you doing? Just attack. And this is something that people have said. There's a lot of cards. I'm not going to go naming them all, but there's a lot of cards in our format that say deal damage to an attacking creature or do something to this creature that is now attacking. So there's a lot of players that are afraid to be like, well, if I attack with my Mirkwood Bats, that's my win condition. What if they have it? I just lose the game now. I'm going to take that risk personally because I essentially lose both ways, right? If they have it, I've lost. If I'm not hitting them for damage, I also end up losing, right? Or I drag the game to a point to where we draw and I still lose, right? That's kind of like where I'm coming from with that. What do you think? What do you think?
I'm gonna be brutally honest here. In the current format, those cards are fake. They don't really exist. I have never seen anyone play one, and I don't ever intend on playing one myself as it stands. Like, combo is just way too good to care about that, unless you play against, like, a lot of Malcolm, I guess, and then maybe it's okay. Um,
That's that's super fair. And for the record, I said the same thing. I literally went out of my way and I was like, bro, like, seriously? Like, you guys are afraid of these cards? Like, I've never even seen one played against me ever. They're like, everyone plays them. I'm like, okay.
yeah, but that being said, there is a concern with players' threat assessment if you're gonna swing that Mirkwood Bats, right? Because a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
people are like, "Oh, you're attacking me. I'm gonna have to take the damage, and I can't afford to take that damage now. So now I have to kill your Mirkwood Bats because I
Yep.
I I can't block it, and I cannot afford to take the 2 or whatever. I don't know the stat line on that card, but yeah, like a lot of people get really hot-handed with their removal whenever something's swinging at them for no reason.
Yep.
So keep that in mind if you are swinging with a win condition, but also use that to your advantage. If you have something that you don't care about dying at all, And do you think swinging it at someone can force them to remove it, and then you just go for the win in main phase too? So funny. I've done it a couple times.
Oh yeah.
It is so good whenever you can bait someone into removing the wrong thing.
Well, it's so interesting because you kind of hit the nail on the head where people are like, "Well, I can't afford for you to hit me." And you're like, "It's 2 damage. It's just a 2/3 flyer." Like, seriously? And they're like, "Yep, kill it." But if your deck is built appropriately, and Sivrus is, there's like 15 cards in the deck that say return their Mirkwood Bat to your hand. So now you were able to pull removal from their hand, right? And you're getting them to do what you want, just in a really awkward way. So it's very telling. Well, it's telling to me. I'm not sure about other players, but to me, it's telling. And I kind of read between the lines when I'm playing, but it's just also players. But with all that said, let's move on to our next one. So this is another fun, and we're just kind of spitballing here, you guys, just for the record. We're kind of using different commanders as examples and stuff like that. But these are all like, honestly, to me, and Puzzle here, not speaking for him, but we kind of think this is a lot of fun because
Oh yeah,
realistically, yeah, like realistically, these we've seen this so many times, and we're going to continue to hammer this home that players just don't attack or they don't want to trade resources. And yeah, you have to sometimes. It's a game of resources. So kind of the way the cookie crumbles. But let's move on to our next one, and we're going to be using Azra Oddsmaker. So this deck is a little pokes and prods is what this deck is, right? It's another mid-range deck. So we've hit 2 mid-range decks back to back. If you kind of see where we're going here, guys, kind of hammering home on this mid-range stuff. This deck is literally its game plan is poke you to death. If you decide to miss 1 point of damage, the game is over for you. So the first cards I would like to bring up, and hit me with this one, Puzzle, are cards like these little hand destruction rat cards, like Burglar Rat, Nizumi Informant, those style of creatures. You gotta get in with them, right or wrong? What do you think?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a creature, right? Like, it is a
Yep.
vanilla after it has come into play. Why hold it back unless, you're blocking like a 5/5 vanilla with it, right?
Yep.
Um, you have to be incentivized to not swing with these. And yeah, like, especially in this deck specifically, you can threaten to just swing it into a blocker and go, I don't care. I'm gonna reanimate it if you kill it anyways with one of my
Yep.
grave flickers.
Yep.
Things of that nature. And if they only have a Firebrand Archer in play, let's say, a 2/1 that they care about, they don't have a blocker. Like, don't pretend like they're gonna block with that. And if they do, that is a massive, massive win for
That
you.
is, bro, that
Take
is
that.
amazing.
Like,
So,
swing into that
yes.
blocker all day.
Well, so you brought it up, right? The fake blockers. So we're gonna kind of like I'm gonna caveat off of you, bro. I have to because you brought up exactly one of our big topics of this evening, and that is pretend blockers, guys. He said it. You heard him say it. Firebrain Archer's not a blocker. So attack into that thing, right or wrong, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean,
oh
it'll
man,
block lethal if it has to, but
yep,
typically it's not just gonna chump block or block a little poke. It's not gonna do that.
yeah. Like I'll be jumping over to Malcolm as the example. I have a Malcolm, a Firebrain Archer, and a Ketis, and people look at me and go, "Oh, I won't attack you with my tutu because you can block and hit someone else," and I'm like, I would have never blocked. Like, why would I trade Malcolm or Kedis or my Archer for whatever? It doesn't even matter what you're attacking me with. Like, we're not making that trade, guys. Like, heck no. So, I
Yeah,
don't know. How do you feel about that?
that happens a lot when I play Malcolm 2. Like, you'll cast Malcolm on 2 or Malcolm on 3, and
Yep.
people, like, if they have a 1-1, yes, you're correct. I will probably block because I am an aggressive blocker and I don't believe in combat tricks.
Yep.
They don't exist, you know? But, yeah, like, if you have a 2-1, Malcolm is not blocking that, especially not on turn 2
Yep.
or 3. Like, you think I'm gonna invest that much to recast my Malcolm to kill your 2-1? Like, no.
Yep.
Get the damage in, you know?
Yep. Yeah. And once again, that is the point of what we're trying to get to you guys. Look at their board state. If there's a Malcolm sitting across from you and you have a 2-2, swing at the Malcolm. They're not blocking with that Malcolm. There would have to be some like outrageous thing that they have in their hand to be able to block, and it still at that point doesn't even make sense, right?
Flash in
Like,
scale of Chisgoria and pump in
yeah.
stuffness. Teshar gets to do that. Malcolm typically not so much.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. But like, so these are the funny scenarios, right? We're bringing up for you guys because there's so many hilarious creatures in the format that give opponents weird choices. And I have two funny ones here, bro. Check these out. Ginger Brew. You know,
Absolutely.
little Gingy. Gingy, I have swung so many times with this little guy. And dude, I don't get it. I won't pay the one, and people just assume it's unblockable. And I never even have to invest that mana. I'm just like swing, and they're like, no blocks. It's unblockable. I'm like, uh, I haven't paid it yet. They're like, oh yeah, but you could, so yeah, I'll just take one. I'm like,
Well,
uh,
if you're at that point, you can't really, but you know.
yeah, no, I that's why I say too. So I'm like, I'm sitting there confused, just kind of like, uh, yeah, or you could block, but like you've already shown me you're not gonna block, so I'm gonna do it every turn and just have free mana, like extra mana every turn. And I don't know if that's happened to you. Granted, I've never actually seen you swing with a ginger brute, but
When I played Liara, I swung with him. Um,
no, true.
but sidebar, I have had games where I had to hold up a hasty creature as a blocker for Gingerbrute, and it felt awful. Um, but yeah, he gets hit for damage pretty consistently, especially turn one, like basically guaranteed to be able to hit someone. And
Yep,
that is not nothing in our format, as we've established.
yep. And here's my other funny creature for you, Goldhound. First off, the little dumb little creature, or as they say, the little idiot, is a first striker, but it also has menace. Guys, keywords are a big deal. This stupid 1/1 has menace and first strike for who knows what reason. Like, who knows? But that's free damage. And some people, just like you said earlier, right? You literally said it. Oh, you could bluff and keep up the Gold Town as mana, or you poke them because that's what you need to be doing. You need to get the points in when you can. Yay or nay?
Yeah, I mean, especially with Goldhound specifically, like having First Strike and Menace means that to block this thing and not lose resources, you have to have two creatures with at least two toughness. This
Yeah.
thing's not getting blocked for like the first three turns of the game, guaranteed.
Yep.
And that's a one mana investment that gets you probably 2 to 3 damage and
Yep.
pays for itself later. It's a mana investment, like a Blood Pet that has
Yep.
keywords. Like, and Blood Pet's a good card, right? So, like,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I don't know.
I don't know. And the card is keyword soup. Like, why does it say everything it says? Like,
Yeah,
it's like it doesn't even make sense. But like, if you go and you look at decks like this, as Azra specifically, these little creatures are so helpful. And it's like you said, you need two creatures to be able to get, or two toughness to be able to really stop this Gold Town. these decks go out of their way to make Goldhound a 2/1. That's a pretty lethal little guy, and it's honestly to me it's pretty entertaining.
Um,
But then I see time and time again, they just leave it up, and maybe they have stuff in their hand, but they just leave it up and never attack with it. And I'm like, is the point of that card to be attacking? The answer is yes. It's not a blocker first off, and it's not just a I need the extra 1 mana randomly and I'll just hold it up for 4 turns. That's like senseless, right?
this this is maybe a little like out there, but this is kind of how I think of cards when they're creatures specifically. It's like compare Goldhound to Lightning Bolt, right? Lightning Bolt,
Yeah.
1 mana, deal 3 damage. Great card. Instant speed. Goldhound, if you don't swing with it, it's a delayed treasure that maybe blocks something and then sacrifices itself. Which, if it blocks something and then sacrifices, um, the way I think of it as a creature is it says heal X, gain X life, and, do the treasure thing later. But
Yep.
what if you got in for 2 damage? Now it's shock plus a delayed treasure, plus it can still block something potentially. And this card's like suddenly way better than shock, and probably got more value than a bolt. Uh,
Yep.
so you just there's a lot of different frames of minds that you can think about creatures, and that's one that I like to look at creatures from if I'm playing a deck that cares about life totals at all.
Well, I mean, honestly, what you said to me at least isn't very far-fetched at all because you're just looking at the card as a whole in the game state and what had happened to you, right? And I see the same thing, right? And I mean, isn't that why we called ourselves the commentary, right? Because we've applied a lot of the things that we discuss here and have learned these things. And yeah, I've literally done the same thing with the Gold Town where I put an equipment on it, it swings twice, gets through, that's 4 points of damage. It makes me treasures because I put like Gold Vein Pick on it, which is disgusting on it. And then I just pop it later randomly, and my opponents are like, why did he just sack it? But I have like 5 treasures banked, and I have some big, huge, giant spell that they weren't expecting at all. So yeah, I completely agree with that, man. And it actually brings us up to a ugh, my allergies are kicking, bro.
I get it. They suck.
Oh, I had to throw that out there. I've been fighting them all day today, so almost sneezed, almost sneezed. Luckily we didn't get there. But no. So jumping all the way back to like these styles of creatures, if you decide to keep that gold town, right, which is a choice, and we're kind of being a little mean with Gold Town, picking on it a bit, but you will lose all of those points of damage. And as a mid range deck, once again, you have to continue to move your game plan forward. You always need to be moving into a forward motion, not a neutral state, as I like to say. So,
Yeah. You got another one queued up, another deck.
oh yeah, this one is a hilarious one. So, I wanted to pick one of 2 different decks, and I'm going to pick the harder one, not the easy one. So, the easy one was going to be Loyal Subordinate, because that's really easy to be like, guys, the deck is about attacking. If you're not attacking, literally, what are you doing? It's same as Dargo Kedis. Guys, that's the point of that deck. So I'm going to hit you guys with another mid range deck because, once again, I'm going to hammer home this mid range. Stop forgetting to attack. So, Sir Conrad the Grim. That is the next one. How do you feel about Sir Conrad as a whole right now?
Um, I like Sir Conrad. I think it's a little bit slow sometimes, and it's mono black, which is not the greatest. But, he does his thing pretty consistently. The big issue is that he's a 5 mana commander in a mono color, that is not the greatest.
Yep.
But yeah, like
Fair.
he does his thing pretty well. He can definitely end games on his own. He's got a mana dump on a stick that helps him do his thing. So, he's not that bad.
But once again, he's huge. He's a 5'4".
He is
Like,
very large. I always forget how big he is until I play him or sit against him at a table and he comes down and I'm like, oh, I cannot block that with Gretchen. Okay.
yeah.
That's a problem.
So I always find it funny because I'll see players play Sir Conrad and they'll just keep Sir Conrad up as a blocker. And I'm like, guys, the dude's huge. Why is that creature out of all of them the one not attacking? And they're like, oh well, he's big and beefy, so it incentivizes them not to hit me. Now here's my arguing statement. If you're open, they'll attack you and others because you're open, which opens up them to get attacked by you and other people, which essentially does the same thing for the whole table, which means everybody will be open to get hit by other players, which does what for Sir Conrad? That says win the game because Sir Conrad damages the whole table. You want people to attack. You want them to leave themselves open so you could get in there. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. Combat incentivizes combat, which is
Yep.
very funny. And some decks just opt out of it, obviously. Like, I'm going to talk about Gretchen later because Puzzle try not to talk
Yes.
about Gretchen challenge. Impossible. Um,
uh,
but yeah, like, leaving down blockers incentivizes people to attack, which
yep.
incentivizes, yada, yada, yada. It's a cycle.
Yep.
Um, there is, like, merit to holding up Sir Conrad as a blocker if someone just has, like, a 3/3, right?
Yep.
It disincentivizes that attack. But this kind of logic is really flawed whenever you're playing against a deck that goes wide, because all you're doing is disincentivizing like the biggest thing with 5 or less toughness from swinging at you, and everything else could still just like completely plow you over. And
Exactly.
especially like a really good aggro pilot will just swing everything at you. Like you can block the biggest thing, sure, but like you're still gonna take 15 damage, and I'm killing your Conrad.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, super fair. Yeah, and I mean, once again, that's what we're hammering home here. Like, why are you leaving Sir Conrad back? The dude is a monster. He's huge. Like, get in there with him. He's whatever decides to throw itself under the bus. That's what they're doing. Like Gretchen can't even block this dude because it's so big. So yeah, like there's so many cards in Sir Conrad too. All the builds are a bit different. But if we just look at Sir Conrad as a whole, yeah, what are you doing? Like, you're not putting stuff in front of that. Malcolm and Kedis is not, it's just throwing things under the bus, right? Because Sir Conrad is so huge. So,
yeah, like you could force people to block with Sir Conrad. He is hitting hard
yeah.
enough to do that, Some decks, not as much, If your commander deals 3 or less damage on a swing, it's more difficult to get people to block it and trade resources up like that. But wow,
But
like
five?
even if they're just chump blocking Sir Conrad, as long as your life total is not like critical, that's free value for you. You're removing even just a token, like you're removing that token for very little investment.
Well, specifically to Sir Conrad as the example, you're still hitting them for damage every time they throw something under the bus.
Yep, that's
So,
true too.
so this is so good with Sir Conrad specifically. And yeah, it's just so hard to when I watch and I see Sir Conrad just sitting up as a blocker, I'm like scratching my head like, guys, that dude's huge. What are we doing? Like, get that guy in there. Send him out. Let him lead his army and send it. But with all that said, let's do the favorite one of the day. Let's move on to Puzzle's favorites. Good old Gretchen. Good old Gretchen. Bro, why are you not attacking with Gretchen for 0? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, so obviously you're not starting with Gretchen herself, but Gretchen has a lot of opportunities to get in damage throughout the game. We play a lot of creatures, a lot of land untappers in that deck, and I don't ever see puzzles swing with them. So isn't this video kind of hypocritical?
Ah,
Uh,
see, there's exceptions to all the rules, and we're bringing them up.
yeah, so I'm gonna bring this up because Gretchen is an exception to this rule, as are a lot of like really heavy Simic combo decks specifically, but like some Dimir combo decks, although Dimir not as much because you have Pestilence and Crypt Rats as potential damage win conditions. So for like Gretchen and Tatiova and Weavers specifically, you typically don't want to be attacking because your win condition is never damage, except for extremely fringe scenarios. Damage is actively bad for you to deal to the table because you want as many people alive to stop other threats and to deal with those aggro players for you. Because aggro players are a threat to the whole table as well, obviously. We're playing a game where everyone's trying to win, right? So
Yep.
decks like Gretchen want to keep people alive because my win condition will guaranteed kill the entire table whenever I get to it. So I don't get as much benefit from removing a player as an aggro deck does, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Obviously, there's conditions on this, yada yada. Um, Taking out the player who's playing hardcore control is still good for Gretchen. Um, but on average, it's typically better for decks like Gretchen to keep as many players alive as possible, which means not throwing around my damage.
Yep. And I find that to be so interesting, right? Because we've been hammering home this whole time. You gotta attack. You gotta attack. But, this is Magic, and yeah, there's always exceptions to the rules. But this exception, is it actually an exception? No, that's this deck's game plan. This deck is deliberately not attacking. Like, it has to do these game actions, right? We're not sitting there with the Sir Conrad that's just up for my deck is based on damage and I'm just choosing not to hit somebody, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Damage
yeah,
is
so what do you
not a win condition in Gretchen. It is in these other decks we've talked about.
exactly. So, I find it to be so interesting because we have all these great examples of these different decks that are just like, guys, we got to get in there. We got to get in there. And it kind of brings me and Puzzle here to a lot of the conversations we've had with one another about the initiative and the Monarch. I see these just kind of get thrown around in a game, and you're like, what ends up happening is you just end up attacking the player to the right, and it's just like one of those awkward things, like, or to the left, sorry, and you're like, really, like, this is what we're doing, like, guys, the threat is this way. And it's so funny because, like, let's say the initiative appears, all of a sudden all those creatures that weren't attacking are now all attacking, and you're like, what is happening? Like, why would you do this? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, initiative makes for some interesting game states with combat. Obviously, that's the whole intention of the mechanic. Even playing Gretchen, I've been incentivized to attack. A little known fact about a Boro Breeze color, it has flying.
Yeah.
I have taken initiative with that card more than once, and you know, I'll do it one time, but in Gretchen specifically, like I'll do it once and get my land and call it a day, and I'll let
Yep.
other people just fight it out because it draws attention away from me. And I basically just removed from combat altogether. Combat hardly exists for you if you're not fighting for the initiative in those games sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, which, is great for me. not great for everyone else, which is one of the reasons I don't like initiative very much. But yeah, it makes some very awkward game states sometimes.
Yeah. I've always found that to be like, oh yeah, we're not attacking, guys, we're not attacking. Then all of a sudden it gets introduced, and then like everybody starts slamming each other. But it's almost always the wrong person, which I've been seeing a lot lately, where it's like they have the initiative here, but the person that's the threat is the Gretchen player over there. And then the Gretchen player gets ignored because they're all trying to get that value off the initiative. So,
And I mean, part of that is like taking the initiative advances your own game state, right? Which is something we've been talking
yep.
about. But, let's say theoretically everyone had been attacking like they probably should have been in the first place, and there was no initiative. Um, Gretchen might have died before they could
Yep.
combo. But with the initiative introduced and everyone doing the same attacks, same amount of attacking, but it's scattered throughout, now it doesn't matter if you start attacking Gretchen in the middle of that because Gretchen's just gonna win at 2 life or whatever, you know? Um,
Yep.
so it can divert damage in awkward ways. Obviously, I'm not saying like absolutely don't play the initiative, especially if you can protect it in those game states. Like, it's
Oh yeah.
extremely oppressive, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
initiative behind a pestilence. Some of the most disgusting things we have in our format right there.
Yeah.
But
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I completely agree. So, but with all that said, you guys, this is a little bit of a shorter one for you guys, but we really wanted to hammer home on this notion. And with all that said, you got anything left for him?
I think I covered everything that I wanted to talk about. Anything else from you?
No, man, I am good to go. But once again, yeah.
Alrighty. Thank you all for watching today. Be sure to leave any thoughts or comments you have down below in the comments section. And while you're down there, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you aren't already. Hope you all have a great day, and we'll see you all next time.